The moment Jinwoo firmly declared his wish to return to the past, the brightest fragment of brilliant light regarded him with quiet respect, sensing the unwavering strength behind his choice. His desire to save the world with his own hands, to carry its burden alone, reminded the ruler of Ashbourne, the former shadow monarch who had once borne that same resolve. With understanding, the ruler offered its support and wished Jinwoo luck in the monumental task ahead. But before the cup was used, a sudden doubt crept into Jinwoo's mind. He asked what would become of his shadow soldiers, those who hadn't existed in the past. The ruler explained plainly, any soldier from the past would vanish, while those born in this timeline would remain, meaning Beru would stay by his side, but others like Greed and Iron would disappear. Jinwoo offered a faint grin and nodded. He accepted the cost, stating calmly that he was ready for what lay ahead. As he stood poised at the threshold of time, the ruler summoned the Cup of Reincarnation. With a solemn gesture, it overturned the relic. Radiant light spilled forth in waves, pure and boundless, sweeping across the world. In that fleeting moment, the earth was blanketed in a gentle, all-encompassing brilliance, as if existence itself were being rewritten. And then, the light vanished. Souls stirred awake beneath a clear, peaceful sky. Inside a modest apartment, the day began anew. Jinna pushed open her brother's door, calling out to wake him, but to her surprise, Jinwoo was already up, waiting. He smiled at her, eyes soft as he watched her unharmed, untouched by the tragedies that had once scarred their lives. Moments later, he stepped into the dining room. The sound of rustling utensils, the scent of breakfast, everything was exactly as he remembered. His mother cooking in the kitchen, Jinna scarfing down her food in a rush. Then, the soft flutter of a newspaper being turned. Jinwoo's gaze locked onto the man behind it, and with a trembling voice, he whispered, "Father." Ilhwan raised a brow at the formality and chuckled, but before he could speak, Jinwoo's tears had already begun to fall. He realized he was truly home, the place he'd longed to see again. As his family turned their attention to him, Jinwoo quickly deflected their concern, saying he'd simply had a bad dream. And in a way, it was true. That nightmare was finally over. His sister was safe, his mother was healthy, his father hadn't vanished. They were all here and whole. This was the second chance he had fought for. Silently, Jinwoo made a vow to protect this precious reality, no matter the cost. He wouldn't waste this final chance. He had the power now to reshape fate itself. But for now, he allowed himself a moment to breathe and savor the peace. Jinwoo thought about how, just for a while, he wanted to hold on to the quiet around him. He knew the monarchs were preparing their next move, yet if this calm could last even a single day longer without harm, he would gladly hold on to it. Later that morning, his mother went about her routine, when her eyes fell on a note resting on her son's desk. In it, Jinwoo promised he would return after finishing what he needed to do. By then, Jinwoo had already stepped through the rift between dimensions. Beru tore through a beast with surgical precision, severing its head in one swift motion. Bellion stood nearby, sword buried in the ground, surrounded by the lifeless bodies of slain monsters. Within the vast, barren void, Jinwoo stood in silence, feeling the oppressive weight of solitude. This place held no life, no comfort, only battle after battle. He reflected on the long years he had spent in this war. He had already defeated countless foes, including Yogamont, the monarch of transfiguration, whose chaos had once gripped the world. The struggle had been relentless. But after 27 long years within this forsaken dimension, Jinwoo sensed the end drawing near. Now only one opponent remained, the Dragon King and his army of annihilation. Fortunately, time moved differently here. Though nearly 3 decades had passed in the rift, just 2 years had slipped by in the world he had left behind. The thought of reuniting with his family sparked warmth and guilt. He wondered how his parents were faring, how much Jinna had grown. He imagined telling her the truth one day, when she was ready. Belian approached, breaking his thoughts, and reported that all enemies in the area had been wiped out. There were no traces of magic beasts nearby. Jinwoo nodded in acknowledgement, assuring himself before the coming clash with the Dragon King that he wouldn't lose this time. Then, with his gaze fixed on the beast corpses before him, he steeled his resolve for the final battle. His voice echoed through the shadows as he commanded, "Arise." From the ground, a fresh army emerged, shadow beasts rising to serve once more under their king. Across the dimensional rift, Antares sat silently on his obsidian throne. He sensed the march of the undead army growing stronger by the moment. One of his subordinates approached, voice trembling, reporting the death of Yogamund and suggesting a retreat, but Antares refused. He was done retreating and had no intention of running this time. He made it clear that he would face the Shadow Monarch here, determined to stand his ground. A grin spread across his face as he acknowledged the audacity of Jinwoo's choice to defy fate, to rewind time itself just for one more chance. He hadn't expected to face him again, not like this. But now it would end. One of them would fall, forever. Antares chuckled darkly as he rose from his throne, his voice echoing with the weight of his power as he demanded his opponent's name. Cloaked in black armor that drank the surrounding darkness, Jinwoo met his gaze with unwavering eyes and calmly declared his identity. And with that, he leapt. Antares responded in kind. Their weapons collided with a thunderous shock, dagger against a colossal sword, signaling the beginning of their final confrontation. Behind them, their forces surged. Shadows and flames clashed as light and darkness warred once more in the heart of the void. Back in the real world, 2 years had passed. America was now gripped by a state of shock and fear, all sparked by a prophecy that stirred widespread anxiety. Normally, such predictions would have been dismissed as superstition, but this one came from Norma Selner. Her words carried undeniable weight. Time and again, her visions had proven eerily accurate, and now Selner had foretold a terrifying fate that sent ripples across the world. She had warned that a god of death would soon descend upon the earth, bringing with him endless soldiers of death, and that no one would escape. The very next day, the skies above Seoul darkened. A massive black hole stretched across the horizon, swallowing the daylight in its void. Every major news outlet echoed Selner's prophecy as people gathered outside, their eyes fixed on the looming gate, their faces a mix of dread and fascination. A murmur ran through the crowd when the gate began to part. Panic stirred, but what followed was not destruction, only emptiness, a vast, silent void. Most eyes stayed fixed on the vanishing gate overhead, unaware of the lone middle schooler who had quietly emerged amidst the chaos. Jinwoo stood silently, taking in the scene, when his gaze fell upon a man nearby, holding an elegant bouquet of flowers. With a calm smile, the stranger welcomed him back, not as an ordinary person, but as the Shadow Monarch. Though Jinwoo was caught off guard by the unfamiliarity of the man, he accepted the gesture and asked why he was being greeted like this. The man, still smiling, introduced himself as an emissary of the rulers. He acknowledged Jinwoo's lonely victory, admitting they hadn't expected him to resolve everything on his own. Sensing the weight of watching eyes, the emissary suggested they find a quieter place to speak, somewhere uninterrupted, where he could deliver the ruler's message in full. Jinwoo agreed. The two slipped away, eventually entering a nearby ice cream parlor tucked between city buildings. Inside the tranquil shop, the emissary blinked in mild confusion at the unusual venue. Jinwoo gave a faint chuckle, explaining that after existing in a world of endless darkness and solitude, it was only natural to crave something sweet. With the formalities cast aside, the emissary began as expected, thanking Jinwoo on behalf of the rulers. But Jinwoo, ever perceptive, cut through the pleasantries and asked him to get to the point. He could feel there was more to this visit than gratitude. The emissary's tone grew serious, though All threats had been dealt with. The rulers now faced a different dilemma: Jinwoo himself. As the Shadow Monarch, his power had grown into something far beyond what Earth could withstand, and so they proposed a solution. The emissary calmly explained to Jinwoo that he should move to another world, one capable of sustaining his presence. But Jinwoo, sensing the underlying motive, offered an alternative. What if, instead, he allowed himself to be sealed away completely? To that, the emissary immediately agreed, but before he could elaborate, the air shifted around them. Jinwoo's voice dropped lower, sharp with suspicion. Were the rulers simply trying to erase him now that he had served his purpose? He wore a faint smile, but the cold glint in his eyes betrayed his trust was thin. The emissary stiffened. He quickly assured Jinwoo that this wasn't an execution in disguise. He had come to address a new development. With urgency, he pulled out his phone and presented an article, the same one circulating America, recounting Miss Selner's grim prophecy. He explained that before Jinwoo vanished, Selner had been a modest fortune-teller at best, but after encountering the residual energies of the ruler's world, her abilities had surged, and so had her influence. As Jinwoo listened, realization dawned. Even in this timeline, his presence, or the ripple of what he had become, had begun to shape reality. The emissary confirmed this with a solemn nod. Fatigue crept into Jinwoo's expression as he leaned back, quietly asking if they could continue this another time. The emissary respected his request, bowed politely, and exited, leaving Jinwoo in the peaceful hum of the ice cream shop. There, surrounded by the murmurs of daily life, Jinwoo stared into his untouched dessert, lost in thought. Every being has a purpose, a reason to exist. He had once become the Shadow Monarch, wielding immense power to stop the invading monarchs and restore balance to the world. But now, that purpose had been fulfilled, and the power he carried felt like a burden. Immense, unnecessary, and out of place in a world at peace. He wondered painfully if he had already served his use, if this world no longer needed him. Just then, he sensed something, a familiar presence outside. Driven by instinct, Jinwoo stepped toward the doorway, eyes scanning the street. His gaze settled on a young woman in a tracksuit, mid-run. She had paused for a moment, drawn perhaps by the sweet aroma wafting from the shop. She turned briefly, her eyes brushing past him. As Jinwoo looked at Ahjin, standing there under a silver sky, he felt something stir inside him. There were still people in this world who mattered, people he cared for deeply. There were memories, connections, and bonds that anchored him, some forged in the past, others waiting to be formed, and that alone was reason enough to keep going. With a quiet breath, Jinwoo resolved to stay, to remain in this world that had once been his and still could be. He vowed to find new reasons to move forward. Beneath the overcast skies of Korea, the police station remained unusually calm. Woo Jinchul, now in his 4th year with the Violent Crimes Investigation Unit, approached with measured steps. An unshakable emptiness weighed in his chest, a strange sense of loss that wasn't tied to any clear memory, but lingered nonetheless. Inside the station, the usual hum of activity resumed as a young rookie approached and handed him a cup of coffee, snapping Jinchul out of his thoughts. He accepted it with a small nod, feeling the warmth seep into his fingers. The void within hadn't faded, but duty demanded focus. There was no room for melancholy in his line of work. When he entered the office, his eyes immediately fell on 3 unfamiliar men seated together. Their nervous energy set them apart. Jinchul asked what this was about, but the rookie hesitated, clearly unsettled. One of the men finally spoke, voice trembling, words spilling out in fragments. He described a shadow rising from the ground, one that spoke in an unearthly voice and gave him a chilling ultimatum: surrender within 24 hours or suffer a punishment so cruel it would make him wish he'd never been born. The second man broke down and begged for imprisonment, confessing to crimes he had long hidden. Jinchul remained quiet, sipping his coffee as he tried to process the surreal account. It sounded insane, but the fear on their faces was very real. Before he could decide how to proceed, a colleague called him into the meeting room. The rookie offered to finish taking the statements. Jinchul gave a nod and stepped away. The chief detective addressed the situation with an unusual request, instructing Jinchul to release the 3 men who had willingly turned themselves in. Jinchul balked, asking if he had heard correctly. The chief confirmed it, explaining his intent. It wasn't about leniency. It was about testing the claim, letting the scenario play out. Jinchul couldn't hide his frustration. He argued they were probably hallucinating, maybe even on a new drug. But another detective dismissed the concern, noting that every drug test had come back negative. And the most peculiar part? These men had no connection to each other, yet all described the exact same event. The chief admitted that due to these strange occurrences, the higher-ups had been pressuring him to investigate for some time, yet no solid explanation had emerged. He added that allowing the bizarre scenario described by the men to unfold might be the only way to uncover a clue, no matter how absurd it sounded. Still uneasy, Jinchul voiced his concern. What if something actually happened to these individuals? What if the threat they spoke of was real? The room fell quiet, then burst into laughter. Even the chief chuckled, shaking his head. He clapped a hand on Jinchul's shoulder, amused by his sudden superstition. Then, more seriously, he revealed the plan. The suspects would be moved to a secure storage warehouse, a controlled environment watched over by detectives, and if a monster did appear, perhaps it would finally give them the answers they were looking for. Volunteers were called for the operation. The chief assured Jinchul he could sit this one out, but Jinchul, after a moment of silence, agreed to join. He had to see this through, with his own eyes. As night draped the skies above, one of the suspects was escorted to a warehouse under heavy surveillance. Inside, the man shook with fear, his voice cracking as he begged for protection, pleaded that the shadow would return to claim him. The chief, arms folded and tone firm, tried to reassure him that nothing would happen under their watch. 10 minutes remained until the promised deadline. A tense silence settled over the space, broken only by the quiet hum of tools and the nervous breaths of those inside. Yet Jinchul stood unmoving near the far wall, his eyes sharp, his instincts on edge. Something gnawed at the back of his mind, a sensation like standing in the eye of a storm just before it breaks. As the final seconds ticked away, the air grew unbearably heavy. The criminal, face pale and drenched in sweat, looked around in disbelief, his voice trembling as he asked why nothing was happening. The chief, exasperated, crossed the floor with narrowed eyes and accused him of faking the whole thing, dismissing it as another drug-induced delusion. But the man insisted through stifled sobs that he was telling the truth. That was when Jinchul felt it. A sudden shift in the air, cold and unnatural. Without hesitation, he shouted a warning, but the sound of his cry was drowned out by the low, sickening groan of the ground, rupturing beneath them. Darkness poured out like liquid ink, twisting and coiling as it expanded. Before anyone could react, shadowy tendrils lashed out, throwing 2 detectives aside with bone-cracking force. They hit the ground hard and didn't rise. The criminal stood paralyzed, eyes bulging with terror as tears streaked down his cheeks. A guttural scream tore from his throat, only to be swallowed by the sheer horror of what loomed before him. Jinchul rushed forward instinctively, but his legs froze mid-stride, as if the air itself had thickened around him. His eyes widened in disbelief. The shadows had begun to shift, and from them emerged 3 monstrous figures. They resembled ants, but on a grotesque scale, with gleaming black carapaces and razor-sharp limbs that clicked and twitched with unnatural precision. The man screamed, a raw, primal sound, but the monsters wasted no time. In a blur of motion, they descended upon him. Blood sprayed across the floor. His agonized shrieks echoed through the warehouse, then were silenced, swallowed by the tearing of flesh and bone as the creatures devoured him limb by limb. Jinchul stood paralyzed, his eyes wide, breath shallow. His mind reeled, struggling to make sense of the carnage unfolding before him. The sight of the monsters, of their inhuman efficiency and hunger, played on repeat, like a waking nightmare. Then two of the ant-like beings turned. Their gazes found him, silent, slow, deliberate. Something in their expression unnerved him more than anything else. It wasn't rage, nor bloodlust. It was satisfaction, as if they were glad to see him, as if they recognized him. And for a fleeting moment, he could have sworn they were smiling. But before he could move, the creatures began to sink back into the shadows, vanishing into the same black abyss from which they'd come. The silence that followed was deafening. Jinchul remained rooted in place, blood spattered across his coat and boots. A strange déjà vu clung to his thoughts. He had seen this before. He didn't know when or where, but he had felt this horror already. By morning, the aftermath had reached the precinct in full force. A senior officer stormed in, his face red with rage, barking demands for answers. His voice echoed through the halls as he tore into the two detectives who'd been found unconscious on the scene, one of them still nursing a dislocated shoulder. Yet none could explain what had happened. When the officer turned to Jinchul and demanded his version, he hesitated for a beat before answering that he'd called for an ambulance after waking up, but the rest was a blur. He claimed he remembered little else. The senior scoffed in disbelief, then released a long, weary sigh. Despite the carnage, his main concern seemed focused elsewhere. The incident hadn't been reported yet, and he made it clear it should stay that way. He ordered everyone involved to keep their mouths shut. The detectives gave silent nods, and the matter was dropped. Later, back at his desk, Jinchul sat in uneasy silence. He couldn't stop thinking about the case, about the men who had surrendered, about the shadows, about those creatures. The whole thing clung to his thoughts like cobwebs. Another detective wandered over, curious about his fixation. When asked if he was still investigating the case, Jinchul replied that it wasn't official, but he was looking into it on his own. The detective seemed impressed, but Jinchul barely noticed, eyes scanning data on his monitor. He was digging through past reports, analyzing patterns, searching for something. The other man leaned in and pointed at a timeline on the screen. He noticed something odd. The number of criminals surrendering had dropped sharply between late February and early March. Jinchul paused at that. He asked what might cause such a dip. The observation made Jinchul pause. He asked if the detective had any idea what might cause such a pattern. The detective laughed softly, brushing it off with a story. He mentioned his aunt, who used to run a small book rental store, recalling how business always dipped around the same time each year, right when kids were heading back to school after vacation. Though, he shrugged it off, calling it just a thought, maybe not even relevant to the case. But Jinchul was already thinking. The explanation felt trivial, even laughable, but something about it tugged at him, something about the timing. He nodded slowly, murmuring that it was worth remembering. Even if it made no sense now, it might later. Meanwhile, a high school on the city's outskirts buzzed back to life as students returned from summer break. It was the start of the academic year, and the entrance ceremony for incoming freshmen was underway. But before the formalities began, a private meeting unfolded within the principal's office. The atmosphere inside was tense as the principal handed over a document to Mr. Park, the teacher in charge of student affairs, and spoke of a troublesome student newly transferred to their school. With mild curiosity, Mr. Park skimmed through the file, expecting red flags. Yet, nothing seemed particularly alarming. The student's father worked at a fire station, the mother was a housewife, and the academic performance was perfectly decent. On the surface, there was nothing that suggested trouble, but the principal urged him to look again, this time directing his attention to a specific line. That was when Mr. Park noticed the detail. A note indicating the student had left home for 2 years during the first grade of middle school. That one line stood out like a stain on an otherwise clean slate, suggesting a hidden fracture in the boy's past. Recognizing the deeper implications, the principal voiced his concerns and asked Mr. Park if he could handle the potential difficulties this student might bring. Known as Viper among his colleagues for his strict, uncompromising approach to discipline, Mr. Park welcomed the challenge with a spark in his eyes. He saw this not as trouble, but as an opportunity to reaffirm his authority. Soon after, the incoming freshmen gathered on the field for the entrance ceremony, their excited chatter filling the morning air. Mr. Park stood among them, scanning the crowd until his eyes landed on the transfer student in question, the so-called troublemaker, Sung Jinwoo. A confident smirk tugged at Mr. Park's lips as he tightened his grip on the stick in his hand and marched through the crowd, zeroing in on Jinwoo. His attention locked onto a seemingly minor detail, the gloves the boy wore. For Mr. Park, it was enough. In his eyes, dress code violations were a breach of order, and Jinwoo was already stepping out of line. With a sharp, commanding tone, he confronted the boy and demanded an explanation. Jinwoo turned his head calmly, locking eyes with him. In that moment, everything changed. The field, the students, the noise, all of it faded. In its place, Mr. Park saw something terrifying. An endless sea of darkness coiled tightly around the boy. The sheer weight of the presence sent shivers crawling up his spine. Snapping back to reality with a jolt, Mr. Park quickly averted his gaze. Struggling to gather his composure, he barked at the other students to settle down and fall in line. But inside, unease gnawed at him, a lingering dread that refused to fade. He questioned whether his eyes had betrayed him or if the fear was justified. From within the shadow beneath Jinwoo's feet, Bellion observed the incident with quiet curiosity. He whispered to his king, noting that the teacher had glimpsed something he shouldn't have. Jinwoo, thoughtful, acknowledged the observation in silence, wondering if this too was a ripple from his return to this world. Soon, the freshmen were guided into their classrooms. While others eagerly formed groups and filled the room with chatter, Jinwoo remained seated at his desk, quietly immersed in a book he had brought along. His moment of solitude didn't last long. A student approached, introducing himself as Young Gil. Jinwoo recognized the name faintly, recalling a distant memory from his first year of middle school. Young Gil, cheerful and friendly, spoke of their brief time in the same class and how he had recently moved to this area. But before the two could continue their conversation, a group of 4 students interrupted. They dragged Young Gil away and turned their attention to Jinwoo, their mocking smiles unmistakable. Their voices rose deliberately as they commented on the glove Jinwoo wore, turning it into their laughingstock. Their intent was clear. They were trying to assert dominance. One of them went so far as to demand Jinwoo remove the glove so he could try it on himself. From within the shadows, Beru seethed. The Ant King, filled with fury and loyalty, requested permission to punish the insolent fools by tearing them limb from limb for insulting his liege. Jinwoo, however, dismissed the notion immediately. He didn't want a scene. Instead, he calmly removed the glove himself. The exposed skin beneath was marred by scars, twisted and discolored from the devastating battle with Antares. The grotesque sight silenced the group. Their bravado faltered as they masked their discomfort with forced laughter, trying to play off their nervousness with weak jokes. As they retreated awkwardly toward the back of the classroom, Beru's eyes followed them. Then, without warning, all 4 of them tripped over nothing in perfect unison, stumbling in a way that bordered on the ridiculous. The classroom broke into scattered chuckles. Beru, having caused the accident with precise intent, glanced toward Jinwoo for a reaction. Though Jinwoo didn't speak, the subtle smirk on his face was enough to show he approved of his mischievous summons handiwork. Later, as Jinwoo and Younggil exited the classroom together, the latter remarked on how much Jinwoo had changed. He was a far cry from the boy he remembered 3 years ago. With curiosity, Younggil asked if Jinwoo had trained intensely during his time away. Jinwoo nodded with a simple smile, confirming that he had indeed trained. Younggil chuckled and teased him, asking if he planned to join a sports club now. Jinwoo's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of excitement crossing his face. He said he had one particular club in mind. Still puzzled, Younggil followed him toward the track field. There, Jinwoo approached the leader of the track and field club, Choi Tai-wong, and confidently submitted his name to join. Choi was taken aback. It was rare for a freshman to approach so boldly, and even rarer to ask to join such a selective club. He asked if Jinwoo had athletic achievements or prior training. Jinwoo answered each question with a quiet shake of the head, further irritating the seniors. They muttered about the exclusivity of the club and scoffed at the idea of a beginner thinking he could join. But Jinwoo stood firm, stating that he wanted to meet someone in a tournament. His thoughts briefly drifted to Hai-in, who had once been a standout runner before becoming a hunter. Jinwoo knew she'd be competing soon, and this was his chance to meet her without the weight of past battles or titles. Though his determination was evident, the seniors weren't about to let him in easily. Recognizing their mood, Choi proposed a challenge. He pointed to a lean runner stretching nearby, a second-year student known for being the slowest on the team. Jinwoo had to beat him in a race to earn his spot. Jinwoo noticed the student, and at first glance, he could tell this was no ordinary runner. While the young man appeared skinny, his muscular thighs and calves told a different story. Jinwoo recognized the ploy immediately, yet he still accepted the challenge. The seniors chuckled to themselves, knowing full well that the so-called slowest member had actually placed third in last year's regional meet. To them, Jinwoo's attempt seemed foolish. Choi raised the stakes, adding a condition. If Jinwoo lost, he'd handle the team's laundry and cleaning for a full month, but if he won, he'd earn his place. Jinwoo accepted without hesitation and stepped forward to run. Elsewhere, Mr. Park was taking a break in the teacher's lounge, still trying to shake off the unease from earlier. A colleague checked in on him, sensing something off. He assured her that he was fine, then moved to the window, lighting a cigarette as he gazed outside. His eyes fell on the track field, where students were mid-practice. That's when he spotted Jinwoo running with the athletes. Confusion furrowed his brow. This wasn't what he expected of a so-called troublemaker. The track coach entered just then, and Mr. Park asked him about what he was seeing. With a chuckle, the coach explained that Jinwoo had asked to join the club. Though skeptical at first, they were testing his stamina. He pointed out, amused, that Jinwoo was already on his 20th lap. Even he had grown tired just watching and had left the field for a short break. Mr. Park leaned forward, watching with a mix of disbelief and interest. Jinwoo didn't seem like the delinquent he had prepared for. Perhaps, he thought, it was time to observe the boy without bias. But just as he began to reconsider, a wave of dread gripped him. His knees weakened as he clutched the windowsill. The field below transformed before his eyes. The running students vanished, replaced by an army of shadows trailing behind Jinwoo. It was too real to dismiss. His heart pounded. Then, without warning, Beru materialized before him and let out a piercing shriek. The sheer terror of it shattered any illusion of safety. Mr. Park collapsed backward, overcome by fear. Beru, having made his point, returned to his duties. Igris appeared beside him, shaking his head at the Ant King's theatrics. Beru grinned unapologetically, and together they reached the same quiet conclusion. This particular human could indeed see them. Later that night, inside a modest grilled offal shop, the rookie officer finally gathered the courage to speak. The weight of a particular incident had clearly been pressing on his mind, the day when a suspect in a bizarre case had turned himself in, only to vanish without a trace. Detective Woo Jinchul, seated across the table, listened in silence, his attention more focused on his drink than on the rookie's cautious probing. Still, the younger officer pressed on, his tone shifting from hesitant to insistent as he asked if Jinchul had seen anything unusual that day. At first, Jinchul deflected, brushing off the questions with vague responses, but whether it was the alcohol loosening his tongue or the burden of carrying the memory alone, something in him cracked. His voice remained steady, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as he finally described the haunting sight he had witnessed, what he could only call an ant monster. The rookie, confused yet intrigued, tried to ask more, but before he could continue, a stranger who had been passing by their table came to a sudden halt, clearly piecing together the strange description. It was Mr. Park, slightly dizzy from the drinks he'd had. Slurring slightly, he asked if what Jinchul had seen could have been a hybrid, an entity with the head of an ant and the body of a human. Jinchul, startled by the unexpected specificity, stood up, ready to question the man, but Mr. Park, as though hit by a sobering chill, quickly turned away, attempting to laugh it off, dismissing his comment as drunken nonsense. Yet Jinchul stopped him before he could retreat. With a look both sharp and hesitant, he urged Mr. Park to sit down and share every detail of the strange thought he had just let slip. The next morning, sunlight poured over the school's track field as Choi drove the running team hard, his voice booming with conviction. He shouted their goal aloud, that they were aiming to be #1 in Korea. Some team members hesitated, recalling how their original ambition had merely been to win the local competition. But Choi brushed off their uncertainty, stating confidently that with their new ace, Jinwoo, they could set their sights much higher. Young-gil, caught up in the team's enthusiasm, found himself running alongside Jinwoo. Unlike Jinwoo, who moved effortlessly, Young-gil gasped for breath, struggling just to keep pace. Jinwoo glanced over, quietly wondering what had compelled his classmate to push himself so hard. From the shadows nearby, Bellion observed with disdain. His voice, low and disapproving, noted the absurdity of humans and their tendency to embrace hardship even when there was no need to. Still concerned, Jinwoo flicked his fingers subtly, releasing a small thread of mana toward Young-gil. The surge coursed through the boy's body, restoring his stamina and sharpening his endurance. Suddenly, Young-gil's pace quickened. To the astonishment of the seniors, the rookie darted past them, overtaking runners who trained far longer. Fired up by the surprising display, Choi barked new orders, challenging the rest of the team to rise to the occasion. Meanwhile, from the teacher's lounge, Mr. Park watched the field intently. Though his eyes were locked on the runners, his thoughts remained tangled in the strange conversation from the night before. The memory of his exchange with Jinchul refused to let him rest. On the field, Jinwoo was not oblivious to Mr. Park's gaze. The man's persistent observation stirred a quiet alertness in him. Bellion's voice pierced the moment again, suggesting they erase Mr. Park's memories and sight, neutralizing the threat before it grew. Jinwoo, however, dismissed the idea. He preferred to understand Mr. Park's intentions before making any move. Beyond the school's perimeter, Jinchul stood torn between instinct and logic. The events of the previous night and the subtle oddities surrounding the school gnawed at him. The mention of monsters by criminals and the strange visions shared by Mr. Park had stirred something relentless inside him. Still, he hesitated, unsure how to approach a student on such matters without sounding unhinged. As he lingered near the school gate, debating his next steps, something subtle caught his attention. A shadow slithered beneath his feet, moving with purpose toward a nearby tree. Jinchul froze, senses flaring. There was something here, something unnatural. Inside the classroom, Jinwoo spun a mechanical pencil absent-mindedly, his thoughts drifting even as he stayed aware. He could sense it. Someone had noticed the sentries he had placed in the shadows. A knock at the door suddenly disrupted the quiet rhythm of the classroom. The teacher flinched as Detective Jinchul stepped in, formally requesting permission to speak with Jinwoo. The class buzzed with hushed whispers and curious glances. The idea of a detective singling out Jinwoo sparked wild speculation. Jinwoo remained unfazed. Calmly, he followed Jinchul into the hallway. As the two stood facing one another, a faint smile touched Jinwoo's lips. It had been years, perhaps even decades, depending on how one measured time lost in the dimensional rift, since he'd seen this man. Though familiarity stirred something warm inside, he held back any signs that might reveal too much. Jinchul, however, found himself unsettled. Jinwoo felt different, not just in demeanor, but in presence. Trying to focus, he pulled out his notepad and asked if Jinwoo recognized anything unusual, specifically something resembling an ant. After a pause, he revealed an illustration, a rough but detailed sketch of the ant-like monster. Jinwoo studied the drawing, his expression unreadable. He admired the effort and even complimented Jinchul's sketching talent before casually mentioning that he did, in fact, know about the creature. Jinchul leaned forward, unable to contain his excitement. He asked again, did Jinwoo truly recognize it? With a composed and mildly playful tone, Jinwoo remarked that it looked like something out of a children's show, those exaggerated monsters with cheap special effects. The answer deflated Jinchul. He had hoped for clarity, for confirmation, but all he got was a dead end. His shoulders sank slightly as disappointment crept in. Seeing the shift in the detective's posture, Jinwoo asked if there was anything else. Jinchul shook his head, explaining that everything had already been cleared with the teacher, and there would be no issues going forward. As the conversation ended, Jinwoo's eyes glinted with subtle amusement. In a calm voice, he asked to keep the sketch, saying it would serve as a memento of their talk. From the shadows, Beru's voice flared with indignation, criticizing the crude depiction of his form. But Jinchul, unfazed, tore the page from his notepad and handed it over. Without another word, Jinchul turned and began descending the stairs. Once his figure vanished, Igris stepped from the shadows and questioned why his liege had chosen not to reveal the truth. Jinwoo's reply was thoughtful. He spoke of forgetfulness as a divine mercy, a blessing given to mankind to protect them from truths too heavy to bear. Even if he'd nudged fate using a divine tool, the outcome remained the same. Igris bowed in understanding as Jinwoo returned to class. Soon after, the recess bell rang, and chatter filled the corridors. A group of girls, already drawn to Jinwoo, surrounded him, eager to learn the details of his talk with the detective. Jinwoo casually dismissed their curiosity, saying the matter was personal. The girls giggled, more fascinated than ever. But the light mood was shattered when 4 disgruntled students barged in. Pushing past the crowd, they looked annoyed at Jinwoo's growing popularity. Their leader tapped Jinwoo's forehead with mocking sarcasm, questioning why the police had paid him a visit. Before tensions could rise, a muscular arm wrapped around the troublemaker's neck. The senior members of the track team had arrived, towering behind them as they grabbed each of the bullies, questioning their motives for bothering their team's ace. The bullies could barely breathe, let alone speak, when Jinwoo calmly addressed the seniors, mildly surprised by their timely intervention. Choi laughed, saying they were there to invite him and Younggil to the newcomers' welcoming party. Choi then asked if they'd be free after class. Jinwoo nodded, promising to attend. The seniors left, dragging the bullies along, making sure they received a proper lesson. After school, Jinwoo joined the team for the party but was drawn away by a familiar voice. Jinchul stood near the school gate, requesting a moment of his time. Choi, sensing a serious conversation, wrapped an arm around Younggil and joked that they'd hold him hostage until Jinwoo returned. Acknowledging the detective, Jinwoo said he wouldn't be long, hinting that his friend's fate depended on it. Jinchul's voice trembled slightly as he addressed him, not as a student, but as Hunter Sung Jinwoo. His memory had returned, triggered by a small moment earlier when he'd handed over the sketch. Their fingers had briefly brushed, and something had ignited, an echo of something long buried. As Jinchul descended the stairs earlier, unease crept in. A voice had called to him, soft, distant, yet unmistakable, as if someone had addressed him as association chairman. The words sent a chill down his spine. He dismissed it at first, but the whispers returned. Jinwoo's name echoed, and pain bloomed in his skull. Visions flooded in, scenes of hunters, gates, rulers, monarchs. He saw Jinwoo in the heart of it all, the shadow monarch surrounded by war, death, and eternity. Time unraveled before him. Staggering, Jinchul struggled to breathe. The scale of what he saw defied logic, yet amid the chaos, one truth rose to the surface. Jinwoo was no ordinary boy. He was a being who existed outside of time, a bearer of forgotten wars. Carrying the memories of a world Jinchul could scarcely comprehend, they moved to a nearby park, away from the crowds. Jinchul, still stunned, asked how long Jinwoo had been fighting in the rift between worlds. Though history claimed his absence was 2 years, the visions told a story far more vast. Jinwoo finally answered. He had spent 27 years inside the dimensional crack. The number left Jinchul breathless. He asked, almost afraid of the answer, if Jinwoo ever regretted it. Jinwoo responded without hesitation, speaking with pride as he affirmed that no matter how many times he had to face it, he would always choose the same path. Jinchul studied him closely. Despite everything, Jinwoo carried himself like a normal boy, but Jinwoo admitted that his life, though fulfilling, came with its challenges. Immortality and unaging youth forced him to constantly change his appearance to avoid suspicion. Their talk deepened, leading Jinchul to suggest something unexpected. Perhaps Jinwoo should consider joining the police force. He explained how many criminals were surrendering, haunted by shadows Jinwoo had left behind. Jinwoo smiled gently, noting that if he joined, there wouldn't be much left for the others to do. Jinchul laughed, saying that was the kind of world he wanted, a place where fear no longer ruled. As Jinwoo pondered the words thoughtfully, he promised to consider the proposal. Jinchul, speaking with quiet optimism, expressed confidence in waiting for Jinwoo's response. With a soft chuckle, Jinwoo teased him not to expect much, joking about the low pay and hard life of officers. Their moment ended with that light-hearted exchange, and once again, the two walked away on separate paths. As time quietly moved forward, an ordinary day in late April turned into the beginning of something extraordinary. In the United States, the emergency call center received a peculiar call from a man traveling through the desert. Initially, the agent on the line assumed it was just another case of a lost traveler needing directions, but the man quickly clarified that he wasn't lost. His reason for calling was urgent. He explained that he had witnessed something strange, something he couldn't rationalize. Sensing hesitation in his voice, the agent pressed for more clarity, asking if there was an emergency or a threat that required immediate response. The man paused, took a breath, and began to describe what he had seen. His tone carried disbelief, hinting at the surreal nature of his observation. He said something was breaking. The agent, trained for all types of emergencies, was momentarily thrown off. There were no buildings in that stretch of the desert. She asked again, seeking clarity, what exactly was cracking? That's when the man hesitantly revealed what he had been trying to put into words. It wasn't a structure, it wasn't the earth, it was the sky itself. Cracks were forming above him, as if the heavens were splintering apart. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Korea, Igris remained vigilant, ever loyal, ever concerned about his king's academic success. He was reviewing Jinwoo's mock test with silent focus, while Jinwoo himself sat distracted, lost in thought. It was unclear how much time had passed when suddenly a sharp chill ran down his spine, a sensation so unsettling and abrupt it forced him out of his reverie. Recognizing the weight of what he felt, Jinwoo didn't hesitate. He contacted the emissary of the rulers and arranged a private meeting at a quiet cafe. The emissary, who hadn't seen the shadow monarch for some time, greeted him with polite formality. But Jinwoo didn't waste time on greetings. There was urgency in his voice as he asked if the strange disturbance he sensed had anything to do with the rulers. The emissary seemed genuinely puzzled and denied any such involvement. Their movements, he explained, did not align with the anomaly Jinwoo was describing. When Jinwoo pressed further, demanding to know who was responsible, the emissary offered a grim explanation. He spoke of beings from another realm, giants known as Titans. Wicked by nature, they had clashed with the army of the heavens before being driven back, but now they had shifted course. They were heading for Earth. Concern deepened in Jinwoo's eyes as he questioned their intent. The emissary explained that Earth's resources had drawn them in, specifically star-laden rocks, the energy-rich matter that sustained life. These beings sought to consume, not coexist. Jinwoo needed no further convincing. These were not wanderers or neutral visitors. They were a threat. The emissary confirmed this grim truth and added something even more troubling. Before the Cup of Reincarnation had been used, none of this had ever occurred. Jinwoo's heart sank with the realization. The emissary nodded, noting that the timeline Jinwoo now lived in had diverged. The Titans, who should have targeted other realms, had shifted their gaze to Earth instead. Jinwoo immediately understood that these events were happening because of him. His immense power had left traces, echoes that reached beyond worlds and attracted entities that would have otherwise never found their way here. The emissary admitted that even the rulers suspected this and that the army of the heavens had already departed, sensing the shift in balance. But Jinwoo assured him there was no need for interference. This was his battle, and he would face the Titans alone. Back in the desolate stretch of the western United States, the government had already moved. The entire region had been sealed off. Experts from every conceivable field had been summoned, all to study a phenomenon no one could explain. The cracks in the sky were spreading, growing wider with each moment. Tanks rolled into position. Combat vehicles formed ranks. Soldiers stood armed and ready, with commanders asserting their confidence. But as the anomaly worsened, logic itself began to unravel. Vehicles and soldiers floated into the air, suspended as if the rules of physics had simply ceased. And then, Jinwoo arrived. He revealed only a fraction of his power, but it was enough to convince even the most skeptical military personnel that what approached could not be stopped by conventional means. He told them plainly, their weapons would fail. With reluctant respect, the military pulled back. Soldiers and machines retreated, and Jinwoo turned to face the fractures above. He could feel it now, an overwhelming hunger, a malignant presence pressing against the seams of the sky. It had been a long time since he felt such anticipation. A faint smile crossed his face as he summoned his twin daggers from the void and gripped one tightly. And then, the sky split. With a deafening roar, the Titans descended. Massive forms of solid stone flung themselves into the air, scanning their surroundings until their gaze settled on a lone figure in black. They laughed at the absurdity, one man against them. But Jinwoo stood firm. Calmly, he reminded the Titans that he wasn't alone. In the next instant, the earth darkened beneath him as shadows surged from below. Thousands of soldiers emerged from the darkness, shapes stretching wide and vast, transforming the desert into a sea of living shadow. Even the Titans paused at the sight. Before it could grasp what was happening, Jinwoo's command rang out. His soldiers surged forward to attack. Tusk was the first to strike. With a guttural chant, he unleashed a wall of fire that surged forward with relentless fury. Flames lit up the battlefield, consuming all they touched. One after another, shadow soldiers poured into battle, turning the desert into a chaotic blaze of war and might. Amidst the chaos, Jinwoo darted through the air, weaving past towering foes. Each move was swift, each strike precise. Limbs crumbled, bodies shattered. Then, In a dazzling display of mastery, he summoned countless daggers from the dimensional rift and hurled them at blinding speed, shredding the colossal beings as they crumbled beneath the storm of blades. Yet one among them endured. A titan, massive beyond comparison, withstood the onslaught. It stood tall and unshaken, glaring down at Jinwoo with a mixture of contempt and challenge. But Jinwoo remained unbothered. Gathering immense black energy into his right arm, he enlarged it to match the titan's bulk and brought it down like a hammer. The ground shook from the impact, dust and debris exploding outward. Still, the titan rose. From the rubble, it acknowledged Jinwoo's strength and arrogantly proclaimed the superiority of its kind. It began to condense its form, reducing its massive body into a more agile, dangerous shape. But before it could finish its declaration, Bellion intervened. With fluid grace and merciless force, he hurled his bladed weapon and cleaved the titan's head clean from its shoulders. The titan's arrogance was crushed in an instant. Bellion then turned to Jinwoo, ensuring his interference hadn't disrupted his liege's intent. Jinwoo gave a nod and instructed Bellion to crush the remaining titans without mercy. With a respectful bow, Bellion soared into the fray, slicing through stone giants and reducing them to rubble. Far from the chaos in the heart of Washington, D.C., the atmosphere inside the White House was heavy. The president sat alone, his thoughts weighed down by uncertainty. The desert incident dominated his mind, every moment stretching the dread. When the military commander finally arrived, the president joined him, both heading straight to the secure conference room. There, the general directed everyone's attention to a video recorded by drones and automated units. No one spoke as the footage played. Images of the battle unfolded as one man commanding shadows decimated towering monsters. The room fell into stunned silence. The weight of what they had just seen sank deep into every soul present. The president struggled to comprehend. Who was this man? How could such power exist? His eyes turned to the CIA director, David Brennan, for answers. But David, though composed, had none. Their methods, surveillance, intelligence networks, none could trace or identify this man. The president's frustration built, but David offered something else, something unconventional, for a situation far beyond normal protocol. He mentioned a name, Norma Selner, a woman known not for weapons or science, but for seeing the unseen, for uncovering truths where logic failed. A few days later, the air buzzed once more with excitement as the qualifying rounds for the National Student Athletic Tournament kicked off. Jinwoo arrived at the stadium, accompanied by his team members, but the moment he stepped onto the track, his eyes locked onto an unmistakable figure. That face, there was no doubt about it. It was iron, now in human form. Team leader Choi, wasting no time, stepped forward and introduced Jinwoo as their ace for the tournament. His rival, unwilling to be overshadowed, confidently unveiled his own trump card, pointing to the towering freshman beside him, a hulking athlete named Kim Chul. As Kim Chul laid eyes on Jinwoo, a strange and overwhelming impulse surged through him, an inexplicable urge to submit. He resisted it with all his will, unwilling to admit even to himself that he might be intimidated. But deep down, he couldn't understand why his heart raced so wildly. Fueled by pride, Kim Chul stepped forward, his posture aggressive, eyes locked onto Jinwoo's. With a bold challenge, he dared him to follow, suggesting they settle things away from the crowd. Jinwoo, calm and composed, walked alongside him toward a quieter spot, far from the track field. There, Kim Chul's inner conflict boiled over. His hand shot forward, grabbing Jinwoo by the collar, frustration spilling out in one heated motion. But Jinwoo didn't react. Instead, the shadows around him stirred, silent at first, then writhing and roaring with familiar joy, as if welcoming a long-lost brother home. Bellion's voice echoed from within the gloom, offering to personally re-educate Kim Chul so that such insolence would never be repeated. Jinwoo, however, said nothing. Suddenly, something deeper stirred within Kimchul. The flood of emotions became unbearable. Tears streamed down his cheeks unbidden, and his knees buckled as he collapsed, overwhelmed by a sorrow and longing he couldn't name. Jinwoo observed quietly, understanding that this boy now lived as a human, no longer bound to the shadows. There was no reason to interfere any further. As Jinwoo turned to leave, Kimchul called out, voice trembling yet insistent. His words, raw and confused, stumbled out, interpreting the overwhelming connection as something strange, perhaps even love. Jinwoo paused, momentarily caught off guard by the innocence behind the misunderstanding. With a deep sigh, he turned back, and with a subtle snap of his fingers, Kimchul's expression softened. Standing before him, Jinwoo weaved false memories into the boy's mind, a simple narrative of a young student picking a fight with a distant acquaintance of his father. It was enough. With his task complete, Jinwoo walked away, leaving Kimchul behind. Yet, in the quiet of his thoughts, he honored the boy's past, the legacy of a loyal soldier who once stood as a protector of the world. He hoped the boy would one day take pride in that truth, even if he never remembered it. Kimchul, now regaining his senses, looked around in confusion, trying to make sense of the strange encounter that already felt like a fading dream. Back in America, a sleek black sedan rolled to a halt in front of a quaint house tucked within a peaceful suburban neighborhood. Director David Brennan of the CIA stepped out, his expression unreadable as he approached the modest home. At the door, Norma Selner greeted him with a warm, knowing smile. David offered a polite smile and assured her he wouldn't take much of her time. He just needed answers. But before he could even begin, Miss Selner spoke first. Her voice was calm, but her words carried weight. She told him that after a certain individual came to her, her ability to foresee the future had vanished completely. David chuckled nervously, attempting to mask the tension that crept into his posture. The way she referred to the individual as the god of death still sent a chill down his spine. Yet her demeanor remained composed. She explained that while she no longer had visions of the future, the answers he sought had already been revealed to her long ago. When David pressed her, asking directly if she knew the identity of the man in the video, she nodded. She knew exactly who he was, but she refused to reveal any information about the individual. Frustration crept into David's voice as he emphasized the stakes, the destruction, the lives at risk, the power that man wielded. He needed to know. Miss Selner cut through his words with quiet authority. She told him he didn't need her to see the truth. His own eyes should have been enough. David fell silent, her words dragging his mind back to that footage. The raw, terrifying strength, the effortless obliteration of threats no military could handle. Miss Selner's voice, calm and unwavering, brought him back. She calmly noted that the incident in Western deserts wasn't the first time humanity had teetered on the edge of annihilation, without even knowing it. The implications struck David hard. Could that man really be what she implied? A force beyond human comprehension, but one that had ultimately kept humanity alive? With the conversation drawing to a close, David asked one final question. Could she guarantee that the man wouldn't threaten humanity? Miss Selner's serene smile remained. Her answer was calm, firm, and unwavering. The man posed no danger. That certainty left David with no room to argue. He nodded and made his way out. As the door closed behind him, a tall, broad-shouldered figure leaned against the hallway wall. Slicked back blonde hair, arms crossed, and a bored look on his face, Thomas Andre let out a low grunt. He watched the car pull away before muttering his disdain, wondering aloud if she'd like him to teach the man some lesson. Miss Selner's gaze shifted to him, warm but firm. She reminded him that one wrong move would be enough to get him disqualified from the very sport that had shaped his life. Thomas grunted, but didn't argue. Instead, he reached for the bag of cookies Miss Selner had prepared and began munching with lazy contentment. With his mouth half full, he muttered that her prophecy had saved his life. If she hadn't warned him that day, he would have died in that crash. There was no doubt in his mind. Miss Selner turned her gaze to the window, voice soft, as she said that he had done many good things in his previous life. Thomas blinked. For a moment, he had no words. The idea that someone like him, branded the devil of the UFC, could have once been good? It didn't compute. Curiosity crept into his voice as he asked what the man in the video had done to earn her trust. The smile on Miss Selner's face deepened. He saved the world, she replied. Thomas couldn't tell if she was being sincere or playful, but that was part of what made her impossible to read. Still chewing on a cookie, he asked the last thing lingering in his mind. What was the hero who saved the world doing now? Miss Selner's eyes sparkled with quiet affection. She replied with calm certainty that he was out there somewhere, simply enjoying his youth. Cut to Korea. The middle school division's preliminaries were about to begin. The announcer's call echoed across the field, prompting the runners to gather at the track. At the sound of the signal, the participants surged forward, each striving to gain an early edge. Among them was Cha Hae-in, her focus razor-sharp as she pushed herself forward despite the pain of a twisted ankle, determined to finish the race. Midway through, she surged ahead, overtaking the others with a burst of willpower that carried her across the finish line in first place. After the race, away from the crowd and prying eyes, Hae-in limped toward the shade of a tree. Exhausted and hurting, she sank to the ground and removed her sock with trembling hands. Her ankle was badly swollen, its purplish hue betraying the severity of the injury. Frustration settled in as she stared at it, wondering if she'd even make it to the finals like this. The thought of giving up hovered over her. Lost in her thoughts, she didn't notice when a hand reached out and gently touched her ankle. Startled, Hae-in flinched but didn't resist. To her astonishment, when the hand was withdrawn, the pain had vanished. The swelling had disappeared, as if it had never existed. Jinwoo was crouched beside her with quiet confidence in his eyes as he urged her to run without regrets, because moments like this came only once. As he stood to leave, his words lingered like the last note of a song. Hae-in's curiosity suddenly overpowered her hesitation. She called after him, asking if they had met before, but Jinwoo didn't answer directly. Instead, he tossed back a playful challenge. If she could beat him in a race, he'd tell her everything. Hae-in's competitive spark lit instantly. She accepted the challenge without flinching. As Jinwoo walked away, a small smirk tugged at his lips. No matter the age, Hae-in, it seemed, hadn't changed at all. Time passed after the prelims, as seasons quietly shifted one into another, and finally, Christmas Eve arrived. The city streets came alive with festive cheer as Jinwoo strolled through the bustle, his eyes drifting toward the couples dressed to impress. Compared to them, his plain outfit felt underwhelming. He grimaced, feeling like someone who had just crawled out of a university exam. Passing a closed boutique, his gaze caught on a particularly fashionable dress displayed in the window. An idea sparked instantly. Black smoke briefly enveloped his body, and in a flash, his ordinary clothes transformed into the same stylish outfit worn by the mannequin. He gave himself a once-over, seeking validation. Tusk, ever the fashion critic, gave an enthusiastic nod of approval, declaring the look perfect. Jinwoo's confidence returned, and with a spring in his step, he continued toward the meeting place. Despite the holiday buzz, Jinwoo's sharp senses remained alert. Amid the noise, he picked up the faintest sound of footsteps approaching from behind. Counting silently, he turned at the perfect moment. Hae-in had crept up, intending to surprise him by covering his eyes, but froze mid-action, caught off guard by his awareness. Their conversation flowed easily from there. Jinwoo casually shared the results of his university entrance exams. Hae-in's eyebrows rose in surprise, questioning why he'd chosen that particular school when better options were available. Jinwoo explained, with calm reasoning, that there was a full scholarship, the opportunity to study abroad, and someone special he hoped to meet. Haeyeon's curiosity turned sharp with suspicion. She asked if that someone special was a woman. Jinwoo, ever the tease, let the silence drag just long enough to amuse himself before replying with deliberate ambiguity. Haeyeon pouted in response, her expression caught between curiosity and mild annoyance. But soon, her grin lit up again as she reminded him of a long-standing promise. With playful confidence, she challenged him to a race toward a tree just down the street. Jinwoo, amused, listened as she laid out the stakes. She wanted answers, all of them. Everything he was hiding, including the identity of that woman, and more importantly, whether they'd met before that track meet. Jinwoo hesitated for a heartbeat before agreeing, signaling that he would take her seriously. But before he could make a move, Haeyeon stepped forward and wrapped her scarf around his neck. Her voice dropped just enough to carry weight as she dared him not to move if he really liked her. Her words struck deeper than expected. As she turned and began walking slowly toward the tree, Jinwoo stood rooted in place, memories rushing in like a tide. He had already lost this bet before it even began. The shadow soldiers, never far and ever watchful, erupted into a chorus of reactions. Tusk and Igris cheered, clearly enjoying the moment. Bellion and Beru, on the other hand, expressed disbelief that their king could lose such a simple challenge. Jinwoo shook his head at their antics, glancing around to ensure no one else could witness the absurd scene. The quiet street, lined in softly falling snow, framed the moment in calm serenity. Haeyeon reached the tree, marking her victory with a light, excited hop. Her joy was infectious, drawing a smile from Jinwoo as he finally followed. With a calm, yet commanding tone, he instructed his shadow soldiers to close their eyes. As he approached her, the playful air between them softened into something quieter, more intimate. Their lips met gently, and the world faded into silence. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the street and wrapping their moment in stillness, leaving only the quiet connection between them. Months later, a college cafe buzzed with fresh energy as new students gathered for a welcoming party. Among them sat Jinho, shifting nervously in his seat. Despite his privileged upbringing and life of luxury, he felt strangely out of place. The casual setting of a noisy eatery serving frozen pork belly was foreign to him, yet eerily familiar in a way he couldn't explain. A classmate soon approached, sensing Jinho's unease. With a friendly tone, he offered advice on how to survive these gatherings, reassuring him to relax, but also warning him about a particular senior in their department. Just hearing his name was enough to make juniors sit up straight. The mention of such a formidable figure unsettled Jinho further, yet he did his best to blend in. Then, the cafe's doors opened, and the very senior they had spoken of stepped in. All conversation died down as the air shifted. He made his way toward Jinho's table. Jinho tensed, heart pounding. His classmate, caught in the gravity of the moment, gave a hasty excuse and vanished, leaving him alone. Jinwoo sat down without a word and poured a drink, placing it gently in front of Jinho. Hesitantly, Jinho accepted the glass, bracing himself for alcohol. But the moment he tasted it, he blinked in surprise. It was cider. With a faint, knowing smile, Jinwoo lifted his glass and told Jinho to call him older brother from now on. Jinho was taken aback. A rush of warmth swelled in his chest, something unexpected and deeply comforting. Jinwoo's quiet presence, powerful yet kind, filled a void Jinho hadn't known existed. The next morning, Jinwoo strolled through the campus on his way to the university hospital. The air was crisp, the day quietly unfolding around him. As he passed a cluster of buildings, a young woman walked by, whispering softly to herself. She was new to Seoul, a nursing student just beginning her journey, trying to calm the nerves that came with change. Her thoughts were tangled with doubt, until her eyes landed on Jinwoo. There was something about him, something familiar. Without thinking, she called out and asked if they'd met before. Jinwoo paused, his gaze meeting hers, distant yet gentle, as he replied with quiet calm that carried no hesitation, saying he didn't think so. Lee Juhee flushed with embarrassment. She turned away quickly, berating herself for blurting out such a thing to a stranger. What must he think of her? Behind her, Jinwoo smiled faintly, amused by her flustered retreat, and continued on. His destination soon came into view, a hospital, calm on the outside, bustling within. Inside, in a room under strict security, doctors moved carefully around an aging figure, Chairman Go Gunhee, now bound to his bed by illness. The doctor helped him up when his eyes settled on a mysterious bottle on the table. Curious, the doctor asked the chairman about it, uncertain of its origin. Chairman Go explained that a young man had visited him, someone who claimed to know him from a forgotten time, a time when they had fought together against monsters. As a gesture of gratitude, the man had left behind the small bottle, vanishing as swiftly as he had appeared, like a fleeting mirage. The bottle was said to contain something extraordinary, a cure, a cleansing agent capable of restoring his ailing body. The doctor listened, struggling to believe the story, but the chairman no longer cared for doubt. His time was nearly up. He had made peace with that. With quiet resolve, he uncapped the bottle and drank its contents in a single motion. Then, he leaned back into the pillows, telling the doctor to let him rest. Whatever came next, he would face it as he always had, without fear. Time passed. Then, something stirred. A warmth began to spread through his chest, subtle at first, then rising. A soft, radiant light filled his vision. He turned slowly toward the window, where sunlight spilled into the room. The rays felt different, gentler, warmer, out of place for the nearing winter, almost like a sign. A faint smile broke across Chairman Go's face as he whispered to himself, marveling at the warmth. For the first time in a long while, it felt like a new chapter had begun. Time shifted to a different timeline, one where Antares, the first monarch born of darkness and the most powerful of his kind, reigned supreme as a being who embodied terror and destruction. Known across dimensions as the Dragon King, he commanded the awe and dread of all who recognized his unmatched might. But on an otherwise ordinary day, as he prepared to lead an invasion of Earth, something unimaginable occurred. Antares awoke to find himself trapped in a human vessel. He didn't know how it happened, yet the truth was undeniable, and even more baffling, he now possessed the memories of the human whose body he inhabited. The name etched into those memories was Sung Jinwoo, a lowly E-rank hunter from South Korea. Through Jinwoo's thoughts, Antares came to understand the young man's life, a cycle of hardship and danger endured without strength or promise. The reason for his persistence revealed itself soon enough, a comatose mother he longed to save. The simplicity of the goal amused Antares, who scoffed at the pitiful motivation, but his musings were abruptly interrupted by the sharp vibration of a phone on the desk. He picked it up, hearing a woman's voice on the other end, laced with urgency as she questioned his absence from an upcoming raid and demanded an explanation. Antares moved to end the call, uninterested in such trivial matters. Then the woman's tone shifted, accusing him of likely being late again, implying incompetence and failure. The word struck a nerve. Lateness, to the Dragon King, was a form of weakness, utterly beneath his pride and dignity. Still holding the phone, Antares demanded the woman's location, his voice carrying an undercurrent of growing irritation. A quick scan of the city allowed him to pinpoint her with ease. In mere moments, he appeared behind her. She barely had time to lower the phone from her ear before she felt his presence, flinching in surprise. Her startled reaction amused him, though he remained focused. His hands gripped her shoulders tightly as Antares asked whether he appeared tardy now. The woman stammered a reply, her shaken but clear voice satisfying his ears. Self-satisfied, Antares turned his attention to the looming gate and the group of hunters gathered nearby. His gaze narrowed. Something about the gate pulsed with an unusual energy, one that stirred something deeper in him. Though gates on Earth were meant to be constructs of the rulers, this one seeped faint traces of a monarch's aura. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The anomaly intrigued him. He decided without hesitation to join the raid, stepping forward with the rest. The dungeon welcomed them with immediate chaos, magical beasts ambushing them at the entrance. But Antares moved with unbothered precision, cutting through the creatures with such speed that the other hunters couldn't even follow his movements. Their murmurs betrayed their awe, whispering about his unfamiliar demeanor and overwhelming strength. Unconcerned by their confusion, Antares pressed on. He cleared the beasts in seconds, then discovered a hidden path within the dungeon's depths. Without consulting anyone, he began moving forward. The group leader raised a voice of reason, suggesting a vote before proceeding further. But Antares responded with wordless authority, delivering a single, precise chop to the man's neck. The leader crumpled unconscious to the ground. Antares scanned the remaining hunters, eyes glinting with challenge. None dared to speak. Silently, they followed. Before long, they stood before a massive door, an oddity for a dungeon. The hunters hesitated, unsettled by its ominous presence. Antares, too, sensed a formidable power from within, though his confidence remained unmoved. Without waiting, he pushed the gate open and motioned the others inside. The chamber beyond resembled an ancient temple, its atmosphere heavy with mystery. Yet Antares' focus remained unshaken. He pointed to the angelic statue at the room's center, a stone slate cradled in its arms. The hunters gathered around, drawn to the ancient runes etched into the slate. Breaking the silence, Antares began reading the commandments of the Cardanon Temple aloud. He hadn't even finished when the colossal statue's eyes snapped open. A beam of red light burst forth, crackling with lethal intensity as it swept across the room. The hunters froze, paralyzed by fear. The light bathed the temple in a searing brilliance, signaling the start of the trial. Antares, however, reacted not with fear, but exhilaration. He launched himself toward the statue, undaunted by the attack. There was no need to dodge. The force behind it was insignificant, far weaker than the breath of the ancient dragons he once commanded. As the smoke thickened around him, he retaliated with his own fury. A breath of destruction burst from his mouth, tearing through the temple's air and obliterating the statue in a single, thunderous blow. Disdain curled across his lips as he stood over the rubble, declaring it the true power of a king. But the battle had only just begun. Around him, the remaining statues sprang to life, yet they did not target the other hunters. Their attention, as if drawn by instinct, focused solely on Antares. He welcomed the challenge. To him, they were brittle toys. One after another, he shattered them with his bare hands, enjoying the satisfying crunch of stone beneath his strength. The hunters scrambled to stay clear, ducking as debris flew in all directions. Panic spread among them as they questioned the commandments and the madness surrounding them, but Antares paid them no mind. He stood atop a mountain of broken statues, his body radiating dark mana. The battle hadn't even pushed him to warm up. Then, as the dust began to settle, the angelic statue with the stone slate rose again. Fury flickered in its empty gaze. It roared its defiance, only for Antares to answer with deadly precision. He snatched a spear from the wreckage and hurled it with effortless force. The weapon struck true, piercing the angel's neck and silencing it forever. Yet even that failed to satisfy him. This was still beneath him. He didn't crave decoys. He wanted the true force behind it all. As if summoned by his demand, the towering, headless statue, silent until now, suddenly stirred. It rose, its voice booming across the chamber, declaring that their cursed connection would finally end here. Shadows expanded around it, plunging the room into darkness as a suffocating power filled the space. But Antares stood unmoved beneath the statue's enormous shadow. This was the kind of battle he desired. He responded in kind, releasing a storm of his own destructive aura. Then, like a dragon loosed from its chains, he charged with relentless fury. The statue, refusing to be outdone, struck back with thunderous force. The thrill of battle surged through the temple, echoing off its ancient walls as the clash of titans reached its roaring pinnacle. And then, Sung Jinwoo jolted awake. His breathing came in heavy bursts, his heart thundering in his chest. He sat up, eyes darting across the familiar setting of his bedroom. Quiet, ordinary. But the memory remained, whether it was only a dream or distorted glimpse into another life across the dimensional rift, he couldn't tell. All he could do was exhale sharply, the weight of it lingering. That wraps up part 1 of the epilogue. Stay tuned for the upcoming parts, hit the subscribe button, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part when it drops. I'll see you in the next one as we dive into a brand new chapter.